as part of the Disruptive Innovation Festival. We're thrilled to be here. My name is Dara Goldberg, and I am currently president of Mindsets Consulting. With me, joining me today, is Celine Schillinger, head of innovation and engagement at Sanofi Pasteur, and also creator of WeNeedSocial.com. We also have Mark Babbitt, president and senior partner at WorkIQ. He is also CEO and founder of U-Turn. Third, we have Sean Murphy, who is CEO and founder of WorkIQ. When they speak for the first time, I'm going to ask each of them to just tell us quickly what each of those jobs mean, because they're all relevant to our discussion today. So we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us as part of the Disruptive Innovation Festival. Our goal is to make it fully beneficial in a way that you walk away and can readily apply some of the thoughts and that you have during this session, that we shared during this session, and that it stays with you. It may or may not differ a bit from some of the other sessions in that this session is not about designing things. It's not about technology. This session is about you. It's about all of us. It's about our minds. We have designed this session to respond to the question, what if we were all great, intentional designers of our own mind? We've put this together with several goals in mind. One, we want to positively disrupt your thinking, in keeping with the name of the festival, when it comes to yourself and the power you have and the freedom you have to be who, not what, but who you want to be. In a world where we all live with constraints and expectations, societally imposed, self-imposed, workplace imposed, you name it. We do have the ability to be intentional about the mindsets, the thought patterns that drive us. We can't control our emotions, but we really can control the thought patterns that determine how we respond to them, who we want to be, our relationships, and the like. We want to help you realize the power you have in that regard and give you a sense with all of us today of what it means to us and how that has affected our lives, and to share stories with you and really encourage you to do the same with us. We'd love this to be, a sharing session. And while we are pre-recording this part this part you're hearing is pre-recorded, we will all be available live at the end of the session to respond to your questions, to hear your stories. And we ask, if not beg you, to continue to share via the DIF site or via Twitter, or feel free to email us directly. We'd love to keep this conversation going. So with that, I wanted to turn to the heart of the matter. The way we've organized this, again, conversation, is around some key questions that we think will get us to what it means and how important and the benefits of being great designers. So what I'd like to do is jump right in. I'm going to play host here, and each of the speakers with me, Celine, Sean, and Mark, are going to respond to each of the questions. And there are what may be periodic, exchanges of conversation, but we're going to get to all three of these questions. And then please stay tuned at the end, because we're also going to leave you with a few food for thought questions that we'd love you to consider and respond to if you have time. So the first question, what does it mean to you to be a great designer and ongoing manager of your own mind? Celine, can I put you in the hot seat first?
Can I answer with another question back to you, Dara?
Yes.
Why are you asking us, actually? And why didn't you ask any other of your friends and to join you in this conversation? Why did you ask us?
Well, thank you, Celine. That's a great question. I'm happy to be able to answer it. What I see as something all of you represent is not just a commitment, but incredible success in making particularly the workplace, but groups of all kinds more sensitive to and able to work in a human and a purposeful way that recognizes that we all need to feel connected. We need to feel of value and autonomous in many ways and connected to each other. And you all understand that a healthy organization, a healthy community, a healthy network of any kind is a positively connected network of people who trust each other, who respect each other, who feel they have voice and that they can take risks and they can not know and be creative in ways that somebody says, here's a half-baked idea, and somebody else says, that's great, let's build on that. That's workplace, that's life. And you all, in the work you're doing, but also just who you are creating that and helping to further that. And people need to hear from all of you and how it relates to the way you think and the way other people have that choice. And with you, Celine, the work you've done in the area of innovation and using workplaces as great opportunities to create change at scale is something I'd love for you to talk about and for people to understand how that directly pertains to them and what they can do with that. And for Sean and Mark, it's been tremendous around optimism and the role that plays, and that being one of Sean's key areas of expertise and work culture, and what Mark has done in the way of not just helping people understand that we all need a sense of purpose, but that positions us to be our best selves. And also the work Mark has done with those who are just entering their careers and the thought patterns they can be set up to choose and possess in a way that'll benefit all of us. So if you're hearing a lot of passion, it's because I'm really passionate about it. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can live up to any of that. So thank you for joining us, and that's enough for today.
Thank you.
And Dara, when you asked me the question, when you said, hey, why don't we speak about that? What does it mean to be a great designer of your own mind? I balanced. My first reaction was, oh, well, of course everyone is a designer of their own mind. I mean, we're individuals, we're thinking, human beings, and there's no question about it. And then I thought more about it and thought, it's actually a complex process or journey or experience to be designing one's own mind, because we are the fruit of our education, environment, circumstances, and of course there's messages around empowerment and be who you want to be and that kind of things, which are partly true, which are, I think, more true for people who are like healthy, who are able, from a social economic perspective, to make choices, and it's more difficult for other people. We need to understand that the idea of choice and having a choice is a relative idea. We don't have all as many choices, and so there's no one size fits all, I think, recipe for designing one's own mind. But I felt the question was interesting and more complex than it seemed in the beginning. And I will answer briefly with what I think about that. Is, to me, designing one's own mind is to expand our zone of comfort in a way that makes us able to grasp more complexity, to play with more emotions, more to have a bigger latitude of reactions in front of what happens. Reality is complex, and if you stay at the level of simple reactions, fight or flee, for example, or if we do not design, in a very intentional way, a better journey to embrace this complexity and make us become fully human in a way, or more complex humans, we're losing our time here. So that's a few thoughts I have about that.
Thank you. That's great. Sean?
Yeah, so I think that being human is central to design, and the reason why I think that is, if we're designing something, whether it be a product, whether it be designing an organization, none of that is useful without humans. And so good designers are human-centered designers. Good designers are people who say, how can I improve the organization? How can I improve a customer's life? And I think if we're going to be designers of our own mind, we have to acknowledge that we each have a responsibility to tend to what our thoughts are, tend to how we see ourselves in the world, tend to how we project ourselves out into the world. Because at the end of it all, designing our own mind is allowing for us to be intentional about how we interact with each other. And I think those interactions, and especially if they're high quality interactions, and have high quality relationships, that's going to allow for us to ultimately do what we need to do in this world, whether it's designing something product-wise or designing an organization. I'll say it maybe in a different way, that in order for us to be successful in any capacity, we have to be very intentional about how we go about designing our mind. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about what does that look like, but when we think about how we show up in this world, it calls us to do things in a much more meaningful, intentional way, as opposed to just blindly going throughout the day and really not having a sense of purpose or even having a sense of our own identity, which is always changing, right? So being a designer of our own mind is really, I think, the starting point to designing anything in the world that it provides value, whether it be for a small group of people or large amounts of people.
Great. That's great. I mean, what backs up a lot of what we're saying is the science and the research that neuroscientists and social psychologists have done together around our ability to be selective and deliberate about our mindsets, and to do away with the ones that don't serve us well. So thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
Mark? So
First of all, you assembled a really smart panel here, I can tell. And it's always tough to go last, but I will say this, and it bounces off of of what all three of you have said, and that is, to me, designing your own mind is without going off into kumbaya territory. It's almost designing your own life, and we have not been programmed to do that, right? We've been taught to be compliant and to be conformists, and to do early in our lives what our parents expect of us, and then maybe a little bit later in life what society expects of us, and then eventually what a spouse expects of us, and what we think of ourselves as a husband, a wife, a mother, a father, a son, a daughter. And we finally learned that to do all of that well, we have to figure out what kind of person we want to be first, and how, as Sean said, how we show up and how we contribute. And it starts at such an early age, this programming, from the time you're 10, 11, 12 years old, you get asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then eventually you get asked, well, what school do you want to go to? And what are you going to major in? And what are you going to do after college? And there's all these very tactical questions that have nothing to do with what kind of person you want to be when you grow up. And so I think that's a really big part of it. You mentioned I work with a lot of careers. We stopped asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we replaced it with two questions. What are you really, really good at? In other words, what do you really do well, and who will pay you to do that? And if you know the answer to those two questions, you're in part designing your own life, or at least the professional side of your life. And research shows, of course, if we're happier in our workplace, we're much happier in life. And if we're driven by purpose in our work, we're probably much more content in our personal lives. And so it's such a big part of what we do. So that's what I think of when I think of designing our mind, is using that input from your parents, from your spouse, from society, from the pressures of the day, from even watching how you react to the evening news in our divisive times. Choosing how you react to all of that and using it as one point of input, but not the emphasis of the design for your life, the design for your own mind. That's a major leap for most people. And if we get nothing else out of the conversation, I hope people will think about that and go, you know what, you're right. That's just one piece of input out of possibly millions. And ultimately I get to decide how I react to that, how I feel about that, and how it impacts the direction I want to go.
That's great.
I would like to add to that there is a continuous journey, that we all go through that helps us shift our own mind or decide how we react to things. But there are also more radical moments where we sort of aha moments, where our life changes because because something really different happens. And I would like to maybe spend a little bit of time on that kind of things, because these are very interesting situations that you can choose to put yourself into, and that will help you radically evolve, embrace new things. These are situations and these are stories, and I think designing one's own mind is really about choosing defining what your story is, making sense of the past, clarifying your purpose to guide your future. And some of those radical shift moments can be times when you put yourself in the situations of not knowing, and you go there deliberately with joy, and you embrace the freedom of being in a place where you don't know anything, and there's all to learn, and this will lead you somewhere. This type of and for me, in my case, the first one I vividly remember was the time when I left my country, age 23, to go the other side of the planet and look for a job in a country I didn't speak the language. I didn't know anyone, and it was a poor country, so all my comfort, of a Western person had disappeared. There was nothing like that. So it was this kind of moments are moments where you take control of your narrative, and they can be extremely precious and go with you. I mean, accompany you the rest of your life. And I would, of course, the best is to have like not just one, but several.
Yeah.
But it's hard because as we grow older, as we tend to surrender ourselves. We tend to have those experiences when we're young, like young adults, or you know, our first experience abroad, for example. But then we go back to the flow. We have a job. We, as Mark said, we have a family, and some of us tend to surrender our sense of freedom and discovery and settle in. And I really want to encourage, you know, everyone, and even myself. I push myself to like keep continuing this discovery path.
Yeah. You know what comes to mind listening to everybody's answers is that design is really about change. And if we talk about designing our own mind, it's basically saying we're working to continually change our mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, even from an evolutionary perspective, we've changed over the years, and in some ways we haven't, right? Some of our basic human needs have always been basic human needs. But I think good designers are, and especially of the mind, are willing, even if it's reluctant, to challenge what it is that we think, because it's changing, right? We change, right? As we've talked about, we respond to our environment. And
Sean, what do you think of the negative connotation that is sometimes associated with changing our mind? What do you think of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question, especially if you put it in the context of management and looking at it from a traditional mindset. I think honestly, for someone who is willing to change their mind, I think that that person is stronger than somebody who is going to just stick with what they said for whatever reason, right? I mean, people have a host of reasons, whether they just are stubborn or whether they don't agree. But you know, change, design in our mind is change, and change is fear, right? And we have to, if we're going to be true designers of our own mind, it's confronting that, right? Because it's not all kumbaya. It's not all ponies and rainbows, to Mark's point earlier. It's, you know, change is incredibly difficult. The mind is, we can't see it, right? We can't see ourselves thinking about whatever it is. And that's scary, but you know, there's beauty in that messiness, if you will, around changing our mind to better evolve how we make sense of the world, the relationships we have.
I would love to jump into that, to respond to that too, because I think it's so interesting how societally imposed our fear of change and not knowing can be. I mean, structurally, whether it's at the organizational level or community level, and that we have an incredible opportunity, if we choose to, individually and collectively, to reframe that, you know, and to really embrace change as, you know, instead of our brains having the door closed and saying, oh good, I figured it out, I'm done. There is no finish line, right? In a good way. Our minds can be wide open and embrace, I just learned something new from you right now, Sean. Well, that's so exciting. I learned things I didn't know. Is it scary? I mean, I'm not at work, I'm not, you know, within constraints, so I'm comfortable. But I also think that we can let go of the idea that having our minds or not knowing can be an incredibly exciting place to be and frame of mind. And if we could get that into, you know, people's mindsets, right? It would just be a whole different ballgame for all of us. I mean, we put those constraints on ourselves, but I also think, like Mark was saying earlier, like they're deeply embedded from such an early age by so many different factors. And part of what I think we're all talking about here is find the freedom, find the greater comfort zone, as our mutual friend Deb Schofield taught us. Like, don't call it stepping out of your comfort zone, expand the comfort zone. And one way, hopefully, to do that is feel you're being intentional about how you think. So thanks for that, and thanks for the question. What about, I guess, to continue what Celine was doing and sharing stories or aha moments, what are, that was kind of the next question, is what are ways you've seen, work, life, anywhere, how it's either challenged you, or impacted you and forced you? I have a few of my own, but I'd rather kind of put it out there to you guys first.
Can you ask the question again, Dara? I just want to make sure I'm tracking with where you're going on that.
Yeah, I'll give a quick story of my own here.
Okay.
And just to share, and also maybe give an example, because that wasn't a very concrete thing. When I was in my early 20s and was part of a firm where it was myself and two other men, and we were creating this firm, a consulting firm, and I hadn't managed before, but we were getting big enough where each of us were hiring a couple people. And I've always been someone who loves to, talk to people and gain their sense of how they do things. And, while I carry my own insecurities like the rest of us, I've also always enjoyed, learning or having people say, why don't you turn it on its side? Why don't you try this? And so that's who I knew I was going into the managing thing with my colleagues. But it was a struggle and it was hard to manage. And I was very uncomfortable figuring out the power dynamics, because I always felt like I shouldn't tell people what to do, or, any of all those kind of tapes. And I was in a meeting with my two colleagues or partners, and I said, I'm really struggling with how best to manage these two people. They're terrific. There's some things that are great, some things are not so great. And they both said, Dara, we think you're too nice. And I didn't lose my cool, but I stepped away from that and said, nice is not going anywhere. Nice is a choice. The mindsets and thought patterns that support that pillar, and what I choose to call pillars, some call values. And I did want to steer us a little bit into the values piece of this conversation, but being generous and kind and nice, for lack of a different word, is absolutely who I want to be. And that was one of my aha moments for, I need to be deliberate about who I am. So that's.
Thank you. Well, and I would say that nice doesn't mean that you're a pushover, right? Nice doesn't mean that you're naive to, the struggles of management.
Right.
Nice is just how you go about carrying out those actions, right? And
they were saying in the context of, I should have said this, that I compliment too much. And that's what really kind of set me in the direction I went. But your examples or different experiences could be dramatically different. And if any of you want to jump on the pillars piece, feel free, or values if you choose to call them.
I can give you another story. For me, one other very, very important moment of self-discovery and designing my mind came through activism. My first experiment of diving into a collective, of forgetting or moving a little bit away from myself and instead focusing on a collective with other people, trying to push together a common purpose. That was a moment of intense discovery of not only myself and what I really stand for and what risks I'm willing to take, and but also like technical skills and all those new skills I needed to learn to fulfill this collective mission. And what was amazing and really fantastic in that is that this learning came because I wanted it. It came from me. It wasn't imposed on me. No one told me you should change or you should become an activist. It really came, from my core, and it both. It was both there already in a way, because it was anchored in my values of social justice, of equality, of community, and that kind of things. But it also brought me to a different place where I wasn't before, and it taught me a lot of new things, and it opened up real new ways, new avenues that really changed my career so far. And brought me to this place that is absolutely thrilling. So activism is one of those places that I think can be really, really beneficial.
That's great.
I don't think you could be a great designer or an intentional designer of your mind without clarity of what your values are, your pillars, or what you stand for.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're designing, in this case, your mind, the assumption that I have is that you're doing so with the intention of doing something good with it, right? Mm-hmm. And values guide that, right? My values of meaning and purpose and growth, those are so influential in what I write, in what I teach, in the relationships that I have, that's kind of the heart of who I am. And as a result of that, it flows out into what I ultimately create. So I don't know that we can be great designers of our mind and not really know what our values are. And when I say no, I don't mean like you have some vague concept of it, but it's like, it's clear. You may have even defined them on paper, right? You may even design your life around them. That's the kind of, that's what I'm talking about. Not just some, vague sense of, well, respect, integrity, and honor are important to me. I think those are all important to all of us. Mm-hmm. And those might be the things that drive you. My experiences in working with adults is that they've not really thought through what that means. What do I value? What are those pillars that shape how I make sense of the world and what my contribution is? A good designer of the mind, you've got to know that, hands down.
Yep. Mark, do you want to jump in?
I will, and I'll try to make it quick. I have to tell you, I'm 57 years old right now as we're recording this. I entered the workforce, actually entered the United States Air Force when I was 17, so I've been at this 40 years now.
Wow.
And I've had 8 different careers. Not 8 different jobs, 8 different, completely, fully different careers. And so when I think of designing the mind and getting back to what I said earlier about everything is input and you get to choose how you deal with that, we also have to be willing, Sean, you called it change. When it came to my career, I always considered it willing transformation, right? And I was in the military for 3.5 years and I thought that was going to be my career. And I went, this sucks. I'm not doing this, right? And then I did the Silicon Valley thing for almost a decade and it got to the point I said, this really sucks. I'm not doing this anymore. And I've done that 6 more times. And so this willing transformation occurs when the input that you're receiving, assuming that you're open to it, says, I went to school to be an engineer, but that's not who I am. That's what I did for a living for a while. And right now it's more important to be a dad than it is to be a 100-hour-a-week engineer or an entrepreneur. Right now, it's more important to be a caregiver to an elderly parent. Right now, it's important to live in a place where I'm comfortable, where my personal nature adapts well to my living environment, right? And certainly some of it is you got to take a little time for yourself once in a while. And that was, for me, Sean knows this about me, that's one of the hardest lessons I had to learn was to be self-aware enough to go, you know what, I've had enough right now, and back off a little bit. And so this willing transformation, I think this designing of the mind occurs in its optimum state where we take all that input and we go, you know what, I don't have to be that, whatever that is. I have to be true to my values, my pillars. I have to be true to the people who count on me. I have to be consistent so people know they can respect and trust me. But within those confines, I get to do whatever the hell I want. And I'm, I even tell my wife this, who puts up with me more than you could ever imagine. I said, I'm a grown damn man. I don't have to do that, right? And sometimes you have to be willing to say, here's the middle finger. I'm moving on. I don't have to accept your perception of my value. I can go do something else. I can be something other than what I am right now. And that's quite a powerful place when you, it took me a long time to get there, but when you finally get there, it's quite empowering.
Yeah. It makes me think there's a commercial here in the States that talks about aging, and it's I think it's like a supplement commercial, and it goes something like a body at rest stays at rest, a body in motion stays in motion. So if you take that concept and apply it to the mind, to the brain, we are going to evolve the more that we make those kind of transformational choices that you're talking about, Mark. That if you just stuck with the military, things would be very different for you right now, right? Because you chose to do that, and so therefore that opens up a whole nother set of paths that you may not be here right now. None of us may not be here right now interacting, because you never know what kind of influence your choices have on others, which I think just ties back to how critical it is that as designers of our mind, of whatever, be guided by the things that are true to who you are, right?
Well, and it is also interesting when you look at, the way the brain works, which is we naturally try to find patterns and create categories and start, establishing rituals and routines to give our minds kind of rest stops, right? Like, now I know I'm always going to go to that coffee shop, or I'm always going to have meetings at this time or in this way. Like, we create those compartmentalizing, or however you want to call it. And yet, well, there's a reason we do that, to keep our brains nimble and to really be who we want to be. We got to shake it up and do it different, and take the different, to be simple about it, take the different route to work, or, open your meeting with the most ridiculous question ever, or with something no one knows. And shaking it up creates that new comfort zone of not knowing. And I think what happens is, we decide, we make assumptions, we treat them as facts rather than simply assumptions. We start believing our worry thoughts are givens. We go on autopilot because we've been doing things the same way. And it's all of that if we can shake up and be more deliberate about kind of, I want to be someone who's great at separating facts from faulty assumptions. Like, that is a mindset that I want to operate with. It takes constant work. And so with that, I'd love to ask you guys, what are some of the, like, to make it a little concrete for our audience, what are some of the thought patterns or mindsets that really drive you and work well for you? And then maybe I'll also ask at the same time, what are some of the ones that
didn't serve you well that you've really had to work at getting rid of? So any of you speak first.
I can start, and I'll be quick because I know we're coming to the end of the first segment. To me, what works well is really embracing diversity, is placing myself in situations where I interact with people who don't think like me, who don't have the same viewpoints, so looking for this instead of hanging around with like-minded people all the time. It is more comfortable. And I really enjoy conversations with like-minded people, but the amount of knowledge and insights and things you get from hanging around with other people is just enormous. And that makes me think of a dimension we haven't maybe tackled too much in this conversation so far, which is the collective dimension of designing our mind.
Good.
As a complement to the individual dimension.
Yep.
That's important. That's good.
In this era of networks, of complexity, where no one can like solve all problems or like important problems on our own, we need to connect with others. We need to, and in our society, you see in the US, for example, the society is very divided. How do we go beyond this division? How do we design a sort of collective brain, our collective mind? How do we reach a common understanding of the situation? How do we make sense collectively together of things that happen? So I think embracing diversity works for me at an individual, from an individual standpoint, but it can also be a great recipe for the collective, sense making. And the last thing is the unproductive mindset I had to get rid of was the me versus them mindset, which affected me at some point, and it may come back. It's a constant struggle, the feeling that I'm better than the others, they don't understand me, that kind of things, the us versus them, or the us versus them. So how can we go beyond that? How can we open up and really search for collaboration, co-creation, collective sense-making all the time? That's my 2 cents.
Well, I love that you brought that up. Thank you. And I think, to take it to maybe a team level for our audience who run teams or part of teams, not work teams, sports teams, any teams, how can you create a shared brain of the team? And Mark and Sean especially know this is something I feel very strongly about, that as a team, you can choose the mindsets that will drive you, and we don't put teams together, teams put teams together. And what better way than to have them work together to choose their mindsets? So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's good. So I'll be quick. The mindset that I live, I don't know if I live by, but it's kind of like a mantra that I have, and that is something that St. Francis of Assisi said, and Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, kind of modernized it, and that is seek first to understand, then to be understood. So I think something that it's very much in alignment with your perspective. I can't make great connections or develop great connections with people if I'm not willing to understand where they're coming from. So that to me is really critical for the world that I'm in and in the work that I do. The unproductive mindset, I wish I could say I've gotten rid of it. It's always there. It's always, in the back of my head, nagging me. And that is, am I really qualified to do this? Who the hell do I think I am? Right? That still plagues me. But despite that, I push through it, even when I just want to curl up in the corner over there and just pretend the world doesn't exist.
Yep. Thanks. Mark?
For me, Dara, it really does come down to what you said about the team aspect. I I love it when my teams at work are driven by a common mission, a common purpose. I've played or coached sports now since I was 14 years old. Took 3 years off while I had an infant son, and that was the only time I ever took off. And I love them to be driven by a common goal. And you said it best, Dara. We don't pick teams. Our teams pick teams. Well, the really good teams do that, but you got to start somewhere. So it actually started with social media, but now it's become my life mantra, and it applies to everybody: family, friends, social media connections, everybody. And it's quite simple. I say no trolls, no drama queens, no divas, no takers, no fakers, no assholes, and that's how I run my life. And what I found while I'm trying to build all these great teams or be part of great teams somebody else has built is if I can eliminate those 6 types of people all lumped into this negative, divisive, bucket that we might put them in, that my life is much better as a result. And I look forward to making new connections, and I look forward to furthering relationships more once I've filtered out those 6 types of people. Once I know somebody's in it for all the right reasons, it's really easy to build a good relationship first and possibly a team later, or micro team later, or project team later. I can think back, I go, I have just the right person for this. She would be perfect in this scenario. Let's go talk to her, right? And so it helps guide how I run my life, how I run my businesses, how I work with my colleagues, how I build new relationships. That's my thing. And it all starts with, I want to be surrounded by people who give a crap. I don't want the drama queens, the divas, the trolls, all of them. I've just decided I don't have time in my life for that.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. So what questions do we want to leave our audience challenged with in a positive way?
Well, I would like to ask the audience, what about you? What are your stories? What can we learn from you? We've been speaking for a while now. We'd love to hear about you.
Yeah. Who are you? What drives you?
Yeah.
Stories, questions, insights, thoughts, anything.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me, and would love to hear what all of you who are watching, listening are thinking is, so why do you think it's important to be intentional about how you design your mind, how you go about making sense of the world? What drives you for that, to pursue that? And if it doesn't drive you, why not? What is it that you go, no, that's just not it for me? Right?
That's great. Please stay on, everyone. We're going to end the recording part of the session right now, but we will be live, and we'd love to, as I've said, hear what you have to say, try to answer as many questions with the time we have, and then certainly at any point continue the conversation. So I do want to say thank you to Celine, Sean, and Mark for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening to us. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.